The morning of my son's wedding arrived with the kind of perfection that California wine country is famous for. Sunlight poured through the vineyard rows like liquid gold, and the October air carried just enough coolness to make the warmth of the afternoon sun feel like a blessing. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room at the Meadowood Resort, adjusting the sapphire blue dress I had chosen months ago, my hands trembling slightly. At 70 years old, I had learned to recognize the difference between the trembling of excitement and the trembling of dread. This was somewhere in between. My son, Callum, was marrying Vivian Ashford, a woman I had tried desperately to connect with over the past 2 years. Every attempt had been met with polite smiles that never reached her eyes, conversations that felt like negotiations, and a distance that seemed to grow wider with each passing month. I touched the pearl necklace at my throat, the one my late husband Gerard had given me on our 25th anniversary. He had been gone for 8 years now, and there were still mornings when I reached across the bed expecting to find him there. Gerard would have known what to do about Vivian. He had always been better at reading people than I was. My reflection looked back at me with concerned hazel eyes. The chemotherapy had ended 6 months ago, and my silver hair had grown back in soft waves that my stylist had arranged beautifully. The cancer had been aggressive, but I had been more aggressive. Stage 3 breast cancer had tried to take me down, and I had refused to let it win. The medical bills had been substantial, even with insurance, and I had quietly sold several pieces of investment property to cover them. Callum knew I had been sick, but I had never told him the full extent of it or the financial burden it had created. I wanted him to focus on his future, not worry about his mother's mortality. That is what mothers do. We carry our burdens silently so our children can walk lighter into their tomorrows. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. in the estate's garden pavilion, with the reception to follow in the grand ballroom. 200 guests would be attending, most of them from Vivian's extensive social circle. She came from old San Francisco money, the kind of wealth that spans generations and opens doors before you even knock. Her father, Preston Ashford, owned a chain of luxury hotels across the West Coast. Her mother, Celeste, sat on the boards of multiple charities and made sure everyone knew it. I had grown up in modest circumstances in Sacramento, the daughter of a postal worker and a school teacher. Gerard and I had built our construction business from nothing, working 18-hour days in those early years, our hands rough and our backs aching. We had done well, eventually developing several residential properties in the Bay Area. When Gerard died, he left me comfortable but not wealthy, not by Ashford standards anyway. As I walked down to the ceremony, I passed other guests making their way through the resort. Women in designer dresses, men in impeccably tailored suits, the air thick with expensive perfume, and the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having worried about money. I smiled and nodded, knowing almost no one. Callum had invited 20 people from our side. Vivian had invited 180 from hers. The ceremony was beautiful in that orchestrated way that money can buy. White roses everywhere, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon, the golden hour light making everything look like a painting. I sat in the front row, watching my only child stand at the altar in his tuxedo, and my heart swelled with that particular mixture of joy and melancholy that all mothers feel when their sons marry. Callum had always been sensitive, artistic, dreamy. As a child, he would spend hours drawing elaborate fantasy worlds, creating stories about heroes and dragons. He had wanted to be an illustrator, but Vivienne had encouraged him to join her father's company instead. Now he worked in hotel management, wearing suits instead of paint-stained jeans, attending board meetings instead of art shows. He seemed happy, I told myself. Surely, he seemed happy. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, everyone stood and applauded. Vivian looked stunning in her Vera Wang gown, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate chignon, her smile dazzling. Callum looked at her like she had hung the moon and the stars, and I felt the first cold finger of unease trace down my spine. The reception began with cocktails on the terrace as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. I found myself standing alone near the edge of the gathering, a glass of champagne in my hand that I had barely touched. The medications I was still taking did not mix well with alcohol, but I held the glass anyway, a prop to avoid questions. That was when Vivian's mother, Celeste, approached me, her smile as sharp as cut glass. Chapter 2, The First Cut. Celeste Ashford moved through crowds the way sharks move through water, with predatory grace and complete confidence in her dominance. She was 62, but looked 50. Maintained by what I suspected was considerable surgical intervention and religious devotion to skincare that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She stood beside me without invitation, her own champagne glass held at the perfect angle, her posture, magazine perfect. We had met perhaps a dozen times over the past 2 years, and each encounter had left me feeling vaguely inadequate, though I could never quite put my finger on why. "Dorothea," she said, and even my name sounded somehow diminished coming from her lips. "How are you managing? I know these events can be quite overwhelming, especially given your recent health challenges." I turned to her, searching her face for genuine concern and finding only polite inquiry, the kind you might extend to a distant acquaintance whose misfortunes you had heard about through the social grapevine. "I am managing quite well, thank you," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It is a beautiful wedding. You must be very proud." "Oh, we are. Vivian has always had exquisite taste, and Callum is, well, he is learning." Her laugh was like wind chimes, pretty but ultimately meaningless. "He comes from such a different background, you understand. But Vivian sees potential in him. She is quite generous that way." The words landed like small, precise cuts, the kind that do not bleed immediately, but ache later. I felt my fingers tighten around the champagne flute. "Callum is a remarkable young man," I said quietly. "He is kind, intelligent, and talented. Any woman would be lucky to have him." Of course," Celeste agreed with a dismissive wave of her hand that suggested she did not agree at all. "Tell me, how are you managing financially? I understand medical care in this country can be quite burdensome, even with insurance. If you ever need assistance, you must let us know. We have connections with several excellent charitable organizations that help people in your situation." People in my situation. The phrase echoed in my ears. I was being categorized, filed away, reduced to a problem that might need managing by the wealthy and benevolent Ashfords. "That is very kind," I managed, "but I am quite capable of managing my own affairs. Are you?" Celeste's eyes flickered over me, taking in my dress which, while elegant, had come from Nordstrom rather than a designer boutique, my shoes which were comfortable rather than fashionable, my simple pearl necklace rather than the elaborate diamond pieces most of the other women wore. "Well, I suppose we all do what we can with what we have. Oh, there is Senator Morrison. Do excuse me." She glided away, leaving me standing alone once more, her words settling over me like ash. I took a small sip of the champagne, letting the bubbles burn my throat, and wondered how I was going to survive this evening with my dignity intact. Dinner was announced, and we all moved into the grand ballroom. The space was transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with thousands of white lights strung overhead like stars, centerpieces of white roses and silver branches, and enough crystal and china to stock a department store. I found my place card at table 12, far from the head table where Callum and Vivian sat with the Ashford family and their closest friends. I was seated with various distant relatives of Vivian's, people who introduced themselves with hyphenated last names and references to family estates in Martha's Vineyard or summer homes in Lake Tahoe. They were polite enough, but their conversations swirled around me without including me, discussions of people I did not know, places I had not been, experiences I had not shared. I smiled and nodded and moved food around my plate, and tried not to notice how Callum had not once looked in my direction since we had sat down for dinner. The speeches began after the main course. Preston Ashford stood first, tall and distinguished in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, his voice carrying that particular authority that comes from a lifetime of being listened to. He spoke about Vivian's childhood, her accomplishments, her grace and intelligence. He spoke about the Ashford legacy and how proud he was that Vivian was continuing it. He spoke about Callum joining the family business and how they had high hopes for his development under their guidance. He did not mention me once, did not acknowledge that Callum had come from somewhere, had been raised by someone, had a history before he met Vivian. When Preston sat down, Vivian's maid of honor stood and gave a speech full of inside jokes and references to their years at private school together, their trips to Europe, their shared experiences in a world I could only glimpse from the outside. Then it was time for the best man, Vivian's younger brother Dashiell, who was 28 and worked in venture capital. His speech was funny and warm, full of stories about Callum's introduction to the Ashford family and how he had gradually become one of them. Again, no mention of where Callum had come from or who had raised him. I felt myself becoming smaller with each speech, shrinking into insignificance, my presence at this celebration increasingly irrelevant. And then Vivian stood, her champagne glass raised, her smile radiant, and the entire room fell silent to hear what the bride had to say. Chapter 3. The Auction. Vivian commanded attention the way some people command armies, with absolute confidence and the expectation of obedience. She stood at the head table in her wedding dress, the lights catching the crystals sewn into the bodice, making her shimmer like something not quite real. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "This has been the most perfect day of my life, and I am so grateful to share it with all of you." Polite applause rippled through the room. I joined in mechanically, my hands meeting in small, quiet claps. "Marriage is about joining two families," Vivian continued, and I felt a small surge of hope that perhaps she was about to acknowledge me, to say something kind. "It is about creating a new unit, a new beginning, and sometimes, to move forward into that new beginning, we have to let go of the past." The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Something in her tone, in the glitter of her eyes as they swept the room, warned me that whatever was coming would not be kind. "Now, I know that Callum comes with certain, shall we say, attachments from his previous life." She paused for laughter, and several people at the head table obliged. "And I have been thinking about how we might address that in a fun, entertaining way that everyone can enjoy." My chest tightened. Around me, people leaned forward with interest, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. "So, I would like to propose a little game," Vivian said, her smile widening. "An auction, if you will. I am putting my dear mother-in-law, Dorothea, up for auction. The highest bidder gets to take her home and relieve me of the burden of dealing with her constant needs and health problems." The room went completely silent. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt every pair of eyes in the ballroom turn toward me. This could not be happening. Surely, this could not be happening. "Come now, do not look so shocked," Vivian laughed, though there was an edge to it. "It is all in good fun. Dorothea knows I am joking. Do you not, Dorothea?" I could not speak. My throat had closed completely. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table, my whole body trembling. "Who will start the bidding?" Vivian called out, raising her glass higher. "Who wants to take on the responsibility of caring for a sick, elderly woman who requires constant attention and expensive medical care?" The silence stretched, painful and endless. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few nervous laughs punctuated the quiet, and then, from the head table, my son stood up. Callum stood up, his face flushed, his expression unreadable, and when he spoke, his voice carried across that terrible silence like a stone dropping into still water. "I bid $8, he said. The room erupted in laughter, not polite laughter, not uncomfortable laughter, but real, genuine amusement. People clapped and cheered. Vivian threw her head back and laughed, a sound of pure triumph, and I sat there, surrounded by 200 people who thought my worth, my value as a human being, as a mother, could be measured in the cost of a lunch sandwich. $8. My son had valued me at $8. I tried to stand, to flee, to escape this nightmare, but my legs would not work. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them that satisfaction. I would not break down in front of these people who thought so little of me. And then, from somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a voice spoke in accented English, deep and calm and absolutely certain. I bid $3 million. Chapter 4. The Stranger. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the source of that voice. The laughter died, as if someone had cut its throat. Even Vivian's triumphant smile faltered, confusion flickering across her perfect features. A man stood near one of the rear tables, tall and distinguished, perhaps in his mid-60s, wearing traditional Arab dress, a pristine white thobe and red-checked shema. His bearing spoke of authority and wealth that made even the Ashfords' money look modest. 2 younger men in dark suits flanked him, clearly security or assistance. I bid $3 million for Mrs. Sinclair, he repeated, his dark eyes fixed not on Vivian, but on me, and I will pay it immediately if she agrees to leave this place and never return. The silence in the room had transformed from cruel amusement to shocked disbelief. Preston Ashford half rose from his seat, his face reddening. Celeste's mouth had fallen open in a most unrefined way. And Vivian, the orchestrator of this humiliation, had gone absolutely pale, swaying slightly as if she might faint. I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I wanted. I do not understand. Who are you? The man moved toward me with measured steps, the crowd parting instinctively to let him through. As he drew closer, I could see the lines of age and wisdom in his face, the intelligence in his eyes, the gentleness beneath the commanding presence. My name is Rashid Al-Zahrani, he said, stopping a respectful distance from my table. And I am someone who recognizes value when I see it, unlike these people who measure human worth in insults and laughter. This is outrageous, Preston Ashford sputtered, finally finding his voice. You cannot just waltz into my daughter's wedding and make outlandish offers. This was clearly a joke, a bit of fun between family members. Rashid turned to look at him, and something in that gaze made Preston sit back down abruptly. A joke, Rashid repeated, his voice soft but cutting. You believe it is amusing to mock an elderly woman who has survived cancer, to publicly humiliate a mother at her own son's wedding, to reduce her value to $8 while everyone laughs. He shook his head slowly. I have traveled the world, Mr. Ashford, and I have seen many kinds of cruelty. But I have rarely seen cruelty so casual, so thoughtless, dressed up as entertainment. Vivian had sunk back into her chair, her hand pressed to her chest, her breathing rapid. Callum stood beside her, his face cycling through emotions too quickly for me to read, confusion and shame and anger all mixed together. Mrs. Sinclair, Rashid said, turning back to me. I made my offer in anger at what I witnessed, but I will honor it if you wish. $3 million, transferred to your account immediately, in exchange for your agreement to leave this place and these people behind. Or, if you prefer, I will simply leave and forget I ever made such an offer. The choice is entirely yours. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. This had to be a dream. Or perhaps the stress of the evening had triggered some kind of break with reality. Wealthy Arab sheikhs did not appear at California weddings and offer millions of dollars to rescue humiliated mothers-in-law. I do not, I began, then stopped, my voice failing me again. I took a breath and tried once more. I do not understand why you would do this. You do not know me. No, he agreed. But I know what it is to watch someone you love be diminished by those who should honor them. And I know what it is to have the power to change that, and choose not to use it. His eyes held a sadness that spoke of old wounds, old regrets. Something in his words resonated with a pain I recognized, even though I did not understand its source. This is insane, Vivian said, her voice high and strained. Callum, do something. Tell this man to leave. Tell him this is our wedding and he has no right to interfere. But Callum did not speak. He stood there, his mouth opening and closing, his eyes moving between his new wife, his mother, and the stranger who had just upended his wedding reception with a $3 million offer. I will give you time to think, Rashid said to me. I am staying at the Auberge du Soleil. If you decide you wish to accept my offer, send word tomorrow. If I hear nothing, I will assume you declined, and I will leave the valley and trouble you no more. He inclined his head respectfully, a gesture that somehow conveyed more genuine regard than anything anyone else in this room had shown me all evening. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, his companions falling into step behind him. The ballroom erupted the moment the doors closed behind him. Voices rose in a cacophony of shock and speculation. Who was that man? Was he serious? Could he really pay $3 million? What did it mean? How did he even get invited to the wedding? I sat in the center of the storm, numb and bewildered, watching as Vivian broke down in tears, as Preston barked orders into his phone, presumably calling security, or lawyers, or both, as Celeste tried to comfort her daughter while shooting venomous glances in my direction, as if this were somehow my fault. And Callum, my son, my only child, finally looked at me, really looked at me for the first time all evening. And in his eyes, I saw not concern or love or regret, but calculation. He was wondering what I would do. He was wondering if I would take the money and go. That look, more than anything else that had happened, broke something inside me that I had not known could break. Chapter 5. The Longest Night. I left the reception without speaking to anyone. While the Ashfords were clustered together in heated discussion, and the guests buzzed with gossip, I simply stood up from table 12, walked through the ballroom on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, and made my way back to my hotel room. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the keycard into the slot. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and stood in the darkness, unwilling to turn on the lights, unwilling to see my own reflection in the mirror. The sapphire blue dress that had seemed so appropriate that morning now felt like a costume for a play I had not known I was performing in. I pulled it off carefully and hung it in the closet, then put on the soft cotton nightgown I had brought. My body moved through these familiar motions while my mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My son had bid $8 for me. $8. The number echoed in my head like a gong, reverberating with each heartbeat. I had carried him in my body for 9 months, had endured 18 hours of labor to bring him into this world, had rocked him through colicky nights and fevers, had taught him to read and ride a bicycle and face his fears. I had worked alongside his father to build a business that would provide for our family, had scrimped and saved to send him to good schools, had supported his dreams even when they seemed impractical, and he had bid $8 for me while 200 people laughed. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and tried to cry, but the tears would not come. I was beyond tears, in some vast and terrible place where emotion had frozen solid. The clock on the nightstand read 11:30. The reception would still be going on, though I imagined it had lost some of its festive atmosphere. Nothing kills a party quite like a public humiliation followed by a mysterious millionaire offering to buy the victim. $3 million. The number was so absurd I could not quite grasp it. I had never had that kind of money. Gerard and I had worked for 35 years and had done well, but $3 million was beyond anything we had ever imagined. With that money, I could live comfortably for the rest of my life, could travel, could donate to causes I believed in, could finally breathe without worrying about every medical bill and property tax payment. But accepting it would mean admitting that Rashid al-Zahrani had been right. It would mean acknowledging that I needed to be rescued from my own family, that the price of my dignity was $3 million, that I could be bought just as surely as Vivian had implied, just at a different price point. A soft knock on my door made me jump. I froze, holding my breath, hoping whoever it was would assume I was asleep and go away. "Mom?" Callum's voice, muffled through the door. "Mom, I know you are in there. Please, can we talk?" My first instinct was to remain silent, to let him stand out there and wonder if I had left, if I had collapsed, if I had ceased to exist altogether. But maternal instinct, that terrible programming that makes you respond to your child's voice even when that child has wounded you, made me stand and walk to the door. I opened it but did not step back to let him in. He stood in the hallway, still in his tuxedo though he had loosened his tie, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" he asked. I considered saying no. Then I stepped aside and let him enter, closing the door behind him. We stood in the semi-darkness of the hotel room, mother and son, and I realized that I was waiting for him to explain, to apologize, to give me some reason to forgive what had happened. But Callum just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. "Vivienne is very upset," he finally said. Of all the things he could have led with, that was perhaps the worst possible choice. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "Vivienne is upset," I repeated flatly. She did not think that man would actually... she thought it was just a joke. She did not mean for things to go so far. "And you?" I asked. "When you bid $8 for me, what did you mean?" Callum flinched. I was trying to play along. She put me on the spot. Everyone was watching. I did not know what else to do. "You could have refused," I said quietly. "You could have stood up and told your new wife that your mother is not for sale, not for $8 or $8 million. You could have defended me. It was supposed to be funny," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "You are being too sensitive. Nobody really thought..." $8, I interrupted. "You valued me, your mother, at $8, and when you said it, 200 people laughed. Were they all being too sensitive too?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And what are you going to do about that man's offer? And there it was, the real reason he had come to my room. Not to apologize, not to check on my well-being, but to find out if I was going to accept $3 million and disappear from his life. I do not know, I said honestly. You cannot seriously be considering it, Callum said, alarm creeping into his voice. He is a complete stranger. You know nothing about him. It could be dangerous. More dangerous than staying with a family that thinks so little of me? I asked. More dangerous than a son who measures my worth in single digits. That is not fair, Callum protested. I love you. You know I love you. Do I? The words came out before I could stop them, raw and painful. Do I know that, Callum? Because tonight, standing in that ballroom, being mocked and humiliated while you and your new wife laughed, I felt many things, but loved was not one of them. Chapter 6. Morning Decisions. Callum left my room shortly after midnight, and I did not sleep at all that night. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the darkness gradually give way to dawn, watching the vineyard rose emerge from shadow, watching the sky turn from black to purple, to pink, to gold. At 7 a.m, I called the Auberge du Soleil and asked to be connected to Rashid El-Zahrani's room. The hotel operator put me through without question, and he answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. Mrs. Sinclair, he said, and somehow he knew it was me before I spoke. Have you made a decision? I would like to meet with you, I said, to understand what you are offering and why. Not at the hotel, somewhere neutral. There is a cafe in St. Helena, the model bakery. Would that suit you? Yes. 9 o'clock. I will be there. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing comfortable jeans and a soft blue sweater, my most practical shoes. I left the hotel without checking out, taking only my purse and the small bag I had brought with essentials. If I decided to accept Rashid's offer, I could send for the rest of my things later. If I decided not to, I would return and face whatever came next. The drive to St. Helena took 20 minutes through wine country that was breathtakingly beautiful in the morning light. I had lived in California my entire life, but I had rarely taken the time to simply appreciate the landscape, the golden hills and ordered vineyards, the way the light hit the leaves. The model bakery was a charming place, busy with locals and tourists getting their morning coffee and pastries. I arrived 5 minutes early and found Rashid already there, seated at a corner table away from the main traffic flow. He stood when he saw me, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt oddly comforting. He was dressed casually today, in dark slacks and a white button-down shirt, his shema replaced with simple dignity. Without the traditional dress, he looked like any other wealthy, distinguished older man, though there was still something about his bearing that set him apart. Thank you for coming, he said as I sat down. Would you like coffee? Something to eat? Coffee, please. Black. He signaled the waitress and ordered 2 coffees. We sat in silence until they arrived, and I used that time to study him, trying to understand who this man was and what he really wanted. You said yesterday that you know what it is to watch someone you love be diminished, I said once the waitress had left. What did you mean? Rashid wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, his eyes distant. My wife, Layla, died 5 years ago. She was an extraordinary woman, brilliant and kind, with a doctorate in literature from Oxford. When we married, my family was not pleased. They felt she was too Western, too educated, too independent. They treated her with subtle cruelty for 30 years, making her feel that she was never quite good enough, never quite welcome. He paused, pain flickering across his face. I loved her, but I did not defend her as I should have. I told myself that it was just family dynamics, that she understood, that she was strong enough to endure it. And she was strong, terribly strong. But strength should not be a requirement for basic dignity and respect. When she was dying, she told me that her greatest regret was spending 30 years trying to prove her worth to people who had already decided she had none. She said that if she could do it over, she would have walked away, chosen herself, lived her life on her own terms rather than constantly trying to earn acceptance that would never come. His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine remorse there, genuine understanding. Last night, when I saw what they were doing to you, when I saw your son participate in your humiliation, I saw my own failure reflected back at me. I saw my wife's pain in your eyes, and I thought, perhaps this time, I can help someone make the choice Layla wished she had made. I took a sip of my coffee, letting his words settle. $3 million is a great deal of money to ease your conscience. Yes, he agreed without defensiveness. It is, but I can afford it, and you can use it. Sometimes the mathematics of redemption are simple. What would you expect from me in return? Nothing, he said firmly. This is not a transaction where you would owe me anything. You would take the money and do whatever you wish with it. Live wherever you want to live. Do whatever you want to do. I would ask only that you allow me to check in occasionally, to know that you are well. Not out of obligation, but because I would genuinely care to know. Why should I trust you? I asked bluntly. As my son pointed out, you are a complete stranger. You should not trust me, Rashid said. Not blindly. You should investigate me. Have a lawyer review any agreements. Protect yourself as you would with any significant financial transaction. My full name is Rashid Al-Zahrani. I am the chairman of Al-Zahrani Holdings, a petroleum and real estate conglomerate based in Riyadh. You will find extensive information about me online. I have nothing to hide. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. That is my private attorney in San Francisco. Call him. Ask him about me. Ask him about the legitimacy of my offer. Then decide. I picked up the card, running my thumb over the embossed letters. Everything about this situation felt surreal, like I had stepped sideways into a different story, a different life where wealthy strangers rescued women from their own families. Can I ask you something? I said. Yesterday, you said you would pay me $3 million to leave and never return. Never return to what? To my son. Rashid considered this carefully. To that world. To those people who measure your worth in dollars and laughter. I do not presume to tell you how to manage your relationship with your son, but I do believe that sometimes distance is necessary for healing, for both parties to understand what they have lost and whether it can be recovered. The cafe bustled around us with normal morning activity, people ordering pastries and discussing their weekend plans, living their ordinary lives while I sat in the corner contemplating an extraordinary offer that could change everything. I need time, I said finally. Not long, but some time to think, to process, to make sure I am not making a decision based purely on emotion. Of course, Rashid said. Take whatever time you need. I will remain in the valley for 3 more days. After that, my offer expires. Not because I wish to pressure you, but because I must return to my business obligations. He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. Mrs. Sinclair, whatever you decide, I hope you know that what happened last night was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their character. You survived cancer. You built a life. You raised a son. Those things have value beyond measure, regardless of whether the people around you recognize it. After he left, I sat in that cafe for another hour, drinking coffee that grew cold, watching people come and go, trying to imagine what my life might look like if I accepted his offer. Freedom from financial worry, the ability to live on my own terms, but also the end of any hope of reconciliation with Callum, the severing of the last tie to the family Gerard and I had built together. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Callum. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Vivian wants to apologize. I stared at those words for a long moment, then turned off my phone and ordered another coffee. Some decisions require silence to hear properly. Chapter 7. The Investigation. I spent the next day doing exactly what Rashid had suggested, investigating him. I drove back to Sacramento, to my own home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where Gerard and I had raised Callum. Being in my own space, surrounded by my own things, helped clear my head. I called Rashid's attorney first, a man named David Chen, whose office was in a downtown San Francisco high-rise. He was professional and thorough, confirming every detail of Rashid's offer. The money would be transferred to my account within 24 hours of my acceptance. There would be a simple 1-page agreement stating that I received the funds as a gift, with no strings attached, and no expectation of repayment. Chen himself would handle all the paperwork and ensure everything was legally sound. I have worked with Mr. Al-Zahrani for 15 years, Chen told me. He is a man of integrity and considerable wealth. If he has made you this offer, he will honor it completely. However, I would encourage you to consider carefully whether accepting it is in your best interest. Not financially, but emotionally. Large sums of money can complicate family relationships. I think my family relationships are already quite complicated, I said dryly. After hanging up with Chen, I spent several hours online researching Rashid al-Zahrani. Everything he had told me checked out. He was indeed the chairman of a major Saudi conglomerate, with business interests spanning the Middle East and investments in Europe and North America. His wife Layla had died 5 years ago. I found her obituary in an international newspaper, describing her as a respected academic and philanthropist. There were photos of them together at various charitable events and cultural functions over the years. In every picture, the way he looked at her spoke of deep affection and respect. In several of the later photos, I could see a tension in her smile, a weariness in her eyes that I recognized from my own mirror in recent years. I also found articles about Rashid's philanthropic work, particularly his support for women's education and healthcare in developing countries. After his wife's death, he had established a foundation in her name that provided scholarships for women pursuing higher education. Whatever his motivations for offering me this money, they seemed rooted in genuine conviction rather than manipulation. That evening, my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone, and briefly considered not answering, but curiosity won out. I looked through the peephole and was surprised to see Vivian standing on my doorstep, alone, without Callum. I opened the door cautiously. Vivian. She looked terrible. Her usual polished perfection was gone, replaced by smudged makeup, tangled hair, and an outfit that looked like she had grabbed the first thing she found. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain in a way I had never heard from her before. I stepped aside and let her enter, leading her to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting together in her lap, and I took the armchair across from her. "Callum does not know I am here," she said. "I told him I needed time alone to think, but I had to see you. I had to tell you." She trailed off, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am so sorry. I am so deeply, terribly sorry for what I did." I said nothing, just waited. "I thought it would be funny," Vivian continued, her voice breaking. "I thought everyone would laugh, and then we would move on, and it would just be a memorable moment from the wedding. I did not think about how it would feel for you. I did not think about what I was really saying. I did not think at all." "No," I agreed quietly. "You did not. My mother raised me to believe that money and status were the most important things," Vivian said. "That people who did not have them were somehow less than us. That Callum was marrying up. That he should be grateful we accepted him despite his background. And I absorbed all of that, all of her poison, without even realizing it." She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. "When that man offered $3 million for you, when I saw the look on everyone's faces, when I realized what I had actually done, it was like waking up from a nightmare. Except I was the monster in the nightmare. I was the cruel person everyone was horrified by." "Yes," I said. "You were." Vivian flinched but did not look away. "Callum is devastated. He knows he failed you. He knows he should have stopped me, should have defended you. He is barely speaking to me. My parents are furious because they think this has embarrassed the family, and all I can think about is the look on your face when Callum said $8. I will never forget that look. Dorothea, never." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. The remorse seemed genuine, but remorse after the fact does not undo harm already done. "What do you want from me, Vivian?" I asked. "I want you to not take that man's money," she said. "I want you to give us a chance to make this right. I want to prove to you that we can be better, that I can be better. Please, do not let one terrible mistake destroy our family." "One terrible mistake," I repeated. "Vivian, that auction was not a mistake. It was a revelation. It showed me exactly how you and your family view me. Callum's participation showed me how much he has changed since he met you, how far he has moved from the values his father and I tried to teach him." "People can change," Vivian pleaded. "I can change. Let me prove it to you. Why should I?" The question came out harsher than I intended, but I did not soften it. "Why should I put myself through the pain of hoping you will change? Of trying to earn basic respect and dignity from people who have already shown me they will not give it? Why should I stay in a situation that hurts me just to make things easier for you?" Vivian had no answer for that. She sat there crying, and I felt a strange mixture of sympathy and detachment. I understood that she was suffering, that perhaps she genuinely regretted her actions. but her suffering did not obligate me to absolve her, or to sacrifice my own well-being for her comfort. After a while, she stood to leave. At the door, she turned back to me one last time. "If you take the money and leave," she said quietly, "Callum will never forgive himself. It will haunt him for the rest of his life." "Then, perhaps," I said, "he should have thought of that before he bid $8 for his mother." Chapter 8. The Decision. I spent my second night alone, wrestling with the decision that would define the rest of my life. Sleep came in fits and starts, and when I did sleep, I dreamed of Gerard. In the dream, we were young again, working side by side on our first construction project, covered in dust and sweat, and laughing about something I could not remember when I woke. "What would you do?" I asked his image in my mind, but he had no answer for me. The dead cannot advise the living on how to survive their absence. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Rashid's number and asked to meet him one final time before giving my answer. We met at the same cafe, at the same corner table. He looked at me with patient expectation, asking nothing, simply waiting. "I have investigated you thoroughly," I said. "Everything you told me is true. Your attorney confirmed the legitimacy of your offer. By every objective measure, accepting your money would be the smart, cheat, rational choice. But," he prompted gently, "but I cannot take it," I said, and felt something break and heal simultaneously in my chest as I spoke the words. "Not because your offer is not genuine or generous, not because I would not benefit from it, but because accepting it would mean letting them win." Rashid tilted his head slightly. "I do not understand." "If I take your money and disappear," I explained, "Vivian and her family get exactly what they wanted. They get rid of the inconvenient, lower-class mother-in-law without having to feel guilty about it. They can tell themselves I chose to leave, that I was bought off, that I valued money over family. And Callum can tell himself that I abandoned him rather than facing the truth that he abandoned me first." I took a breath, feeling the clarity of my decision settle into my bones. I am not going to give them that easy narrative. I am going to stay, not in their lives, not in their space, but in my own life, on my own terms. I am going to be a visible reminder of what they did and who they chose to be. And if Callum wants a relationship with me, he is going to have to work for it, to prove that he understands what he did wrong and that he is willing to change. Rashid studied me for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "You are stronger than I thought. Stronger than Layla was, perhaps, or maybe just at a different point in your journey." "I am not strong," I corrected. "I am just tired of being diminished." "There is a difference." "Yes," he agreed. "There is." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table between us. "I expected you might make this choice. This is for you anyway." I opened the envelope and found a check for $50,000. "I cannot accept this," I said immediately. "It is not charity," Rashid said firmly. "Consider it payment for a lesson learned. You have taught me something important today, Mrs. Sinclair. You have reminded me that sometimes the bravest choice is not to run away, but to stand your ground, even when standing your ground is painful and complicated and offers no easy resolution." $50,000 is too much for a lesson, I protested. "For some lessons, there is no such thing as too much," he said. "Use it to cover your medical expenses, to secure your home, to give yourself breathing room while you figure out what comes next. Let it be a gift from one person who has been diminished to another, with no strings and no expectations." I looked at the check, at the number written in Rashid's firm handwriting. $50,000 would eliminate my medical debt completely and leave enough to make necessary repairs on my house that I had been putting off. It would give me financial stability without making me dependent on anyone. "Thank you," I said quietly. "This is incredibly kind." "Kindness is free," Rashid said. "Money is not, but in this case, it is close enough." He stood to leave, then paused. "May I ask, what will you do now?" "I am going to rebuild my life," I said. "On my own terms, for my own purposes. I am going to stop waiting for my son to remember that he loves me, and start remembering that I love myself. And I am going to make sure that whenever Callum looks at me, he sees not someone who needs him, but someone who chose herself." "That," Rashid said with approval, "is an excellent plan." Chapter 9. Rebuilding. The weeks after the wedding were the hardest of my life. Harder even than the cancer treatment. Because this pain was emotional rather than physical, and there was no clear endpoint. No day when the doctors would declare me in remission. Callum called repeatedly. I did not answer. He sent texts, each one more desperate than the last, begging me to talk to him, to give him a chance to explain. I read them all but responded to none. I was not being cruel. I was protecting the fragile new growth of my self-respect, which needed time and space to take root. Vivian sent a formal letter of apology, written on expensive stationery and elegant calligraphy. It was heartfelt and detailed, acknowledging exactly what she had done wrong and promising to do better. I appreciated the effort, but words on paper could not undo the humiliation of that night. The Ashfords, to my surprise, sent nothing. Perhaps they felt the matter was beneath their attention, or perhaps they simply did not care. Either way, their silence told me everything I needed to know about whether my relationship with them could ever be salvaged. I used Rashid's $50,000 exactly as I had planned. I paid off all my remaining medical bills, marveling at how much lighter I felt once that particular burden was lifted. I hired contractors to fix the roof that had been leaking for 2 years, to replace the ancient water heater, to repair the fence that Gerard had always meant to get around to fixing. My house, which had been slowly deteriorating, began to look loved again. I also did something I had not done in decades. I joined a community. There was a cancer survivors support group that met weekly at the local hospital. I had always told myself I did not need support, that I could handle things on my own. But sitting in that circle of people who understood what it meant to have your body betray you, to look death in the face and choose to keep fighting, I realized how much I had been missing. One of the women in the group, Marlene, became a particular friend. She was 68, a retired high school teacher who had survived ovarian cancer and whose adult children had stopped speaking to her after she refused to move into assisted living. We recognized each other's loneliness and made space for it without trying to fix it. My therapist says I need to accept that my children are who they are, Marlene told me one afternoon over coffee, that I cannot change them or control how they treat me. All I can control is how I respond. That sounds wise, I said. Also, impossible. Very impossible, she agreed, laughing. But I'm trying anyway. What else can we do? 3 months after the wedding, Callum showed up at my door. I had not given him permission to come, but I also had not told him to stay away. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, thinner than I remembered, exhausted looking, I felt my heart do that terrible motherly thing where it wants to forgive immediately, to ease his suffering, to pretend nothing had happened. But I had spent 3 months building something stronger than that reflexive maternal forgiveness. So I simply said, "Hello, Callum," and waited. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Do you think you have the right to?" I countered. He flinched. No, I do not. But I am asking anyway because I need to talk to you, and I cannot do it properly standing on your doorstep. I considered making him do it anyway, making him speak his piece while the neighbors watched, giving him a taste of public vulnerability. But that would have been cruelty for cruelty's sake, and I was trying not to become the thing that had hurt me. I let him in. We sat in the living room, the same room where Vivian had cried and apologized weeks earlier. Callum looked around, noticing the fresh paint, the fixed window, the new curtains I had hung. "The house looks good," he said awkwardly. "I have been taking care of it," I replied. "I'm taking care of myself, actually. It turns out I am quite good at it when I stop waiting for other people to do it for me." Callum's face crumpled. "Mom, I am so sorry. I have been trying to find the words, trying to figure out how to explain what I did, and there are no words. There is no explanation that makes it okay." "No," I agreed. "There is not." "Vivian and I have been in couples therapy," he continued. "And I have been in individual therapy too. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand how much I had changed since I met the Ashfords, how much I had absorbed their values without realizing it. I started measuring people's worth the way they did, in money and status and whether they fit into a certain social circle." He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "And when Vivian started that auction, I should have shut it down immediately. I should have stood up and defended you and told her and everyone else that my mother is not a joke. But instead, I was so concerned with fitting in, with not making waves, with keeping Vivian happy, that I joined in the humiliation. I bid $8 for my own mother, and then I watched 200 people laugh at you." "Yes," I said. You did. I do not know how to fix this, Callum said, tears streaming down his face now. I do not know how to undo what I did or make you trust me again, but I am asking you to let me try. Please, Mom. Please give me a chance to prove I can be better. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had rocked and the man he had become, and I felt the weight of everything we had been to each other and everything we had lost. Callum, I said gently, I do not think we can go back to what we were before. That relationship, the one where I was always available and always forgiving and always putting your needs before my own, that relationship is over. It died the night of your wedding. He made a sound like a wounded animal. But, I continued, that does not mean we cannot build something new, something different. A relationship between two adults who respect each other and set boundaries and work to understand each other. But it will take time, a lot of time. And it will require you to keep doing the work you have started, to keep examining your values and choices, to keep proving through actions, not just words, that you understand what you did wrong. I will do anything, Callum promised. Anything you need. What I need, I said, is for you to understand that your apology, while necessary, does not obligate me to forgive you immediately, or to let things go back to how they were. What I need is for you to respect my boundaries and my timeline. What I need is for you to prove, over months and years, that you value me not because I am your mother, but because I am a person worthy of value. I do value you, Callum said. I love you. Then prove it, I said. Not today, not in one grand gesture, but every day in small ways. Call me to ask how I am, not to ask for something. Visit me because you want to see me, not because you feel guilty. Stand up for me when other people disrespect me, especially if those people are your wife or her family. Build a relationship with me based on mutual respect, not obligation or guilt. Callum nodded, wiping his eyes. Can I hug you? I considered this carefully. A hug would feel good, would ease the ache in both our chests, but it would also signal that everything was forgiven, that we were okay, that the hard work of rebuilding was already done. Not yet, I said softly. But maybe someday soon. Chapter 10. The New Normal. The months that followed established a new pattern. Callum called every Sunday afternoon, brief conversations where he told me about his week and asked about mine. He did not mention Vivian much, and I did not ask. He did not invite me to their apartment, and I did not expect him to. We were learning each other again, carefully, like strangers who spoke the same language but were still figuring out how to communicate. In June, he asked if he could come help me with some yard work. I almost said no, almost told him I could handle it myself. But Marlene, my friend from the support group, had been working with me on accepting help without feeling diminished. So I said yes. He arrived early on a Saturday morning, dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt, bringing tools and plants from a nursery. We worked side by side in the garden, pulling weeds, planting flowers, barely talking. But there was something healing in the shared labor, in working together toward something beautiful without words getting in the way. At the end of the day, we sat on the porch with cold lemonade, sweaty and dirt-stained and exhausted. Callum looked at the transformed garden, at the bright flowers and the neat beds, and smiled. It looks good, Mom. Yes, I agreed. It does. Vivian and I are separated, he said suddenly. Have been for a month now. I turned to look at him, surprised. I am sorry to hear that. Are you? He asked. Really? I considered this honestly. Yes, I am. Not because I think you should stay with someone who treats people badly, but because I know divorce is painful, and I do not wish pain on you, even after everything that happened. Callum nodded slowly. She was trying, genuinely trying to change, going to therapy, being nicer to service workers, examining her attitudes about money and class. But every time we were around her family, she would slip back into those old patterns. And I realized I could not spend my life with someone who needed constant vigilance to be a decent person. That is a mature realization, I said. Dr. Martinez says I married Vivian for the wrong reasons, Callum continued. That I was attracted to her wealth and status because I felt insecure about my own background. That I was trying to prove something to myself, or maybe to Dad's memory, by becoming part of their world. And now? I asked. Now I am trying to figure out who I actually am when I am not performing for someone else. he said. It is harder than I thought it would be. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the evening settle over the neighborhood. This was not forgiveness yet, not complete healing, but it was something. It was a beginning. In August, Rashid contacted me. He was in San Francisco for business and wondered if I might join him for dinner. I accepted, curious to see him again and to thank him properly for his gift. We met at an elegant restaurant in Union Square, the kind of place where Gerard and I had never been able to afford to eat. Rashid looked well, more relaxed than he had seemed in Napa Valley, and genuinely pleased to see me. You look different, he said after we had ordered. Lighter, somehow. I am different, I agreed. I have been learning to put myself first for the first time in my life. It is surprisingly difficult, and surprisingly necessary. And your son? He asked. We are rebuilding, I said, slowly, carefully. It may never be what it was, but perhaps it will be better, more honest, at least. Rashid nodded approvingly. I am glad. You made the right choice, staying and fighting for yourself rather than running away. I almost took your money, I admitted. I almost said yes to the $3 million. I know, he said. I could see it in your eyes when we met that last time. You were so close to accepting. Why did you give me the $50,000 even after I declined? I asked. Because you taught me something, Rashid said. You taught me that redemption is not about grand gestures or large sums of money. It is about showing up consistently, about respecting boundaries, about proving through actions that you understand the harm you caused and are committed to doing better. I failed to do that for Layla, but watching you demand it from your son gave me hope that perhaps it is not too late for me to live differently going forward. It is never too late, I said softly. We talked through dinner about many things. His work, my support group, his continued grief for Layla, my complicated feelings about becoming who I was always meant to be at 70 years old. When the evening ended, he walked me to my car and shook my hand with formal courtesy. If you ever need anything, he said, you have my number. Not money, not intervention, but perhaps advice from someone who understands what it is to rebuild your life after significant loss. Thank you, I said, for everything, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for offering me a way out when I felt trapped, for respecting my decision even when it meant you could not play the hero. Mrs. Sinclair, he said with a smile, you did not need a hero. You just needed someone to remind you that you were worth fighting for. The actual fighting you did yourself. Chapter 11. The Reckoning. In October, 1 year after the wedding, Vivian called me. She had never called before, always communicating through Callum or formal letters, so hearing her voice was jarring. Dorothea, I hope it is okay that I called, she said, her voice uncertain. I know we have not spoken directly since that day I came to your house. What can I do for you, Vivian? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. I wanted you to know that Callum and I signed the divorce papers yesterday, she said. It is final now, and I wanted to apologize to you one more time before we all move forward with our separate lives. You have already apologized, I pointed out. I know, but I am not sure I fully understood what I was apologizing for until recently. I have spent the past year in intensive therapy, working through my family issues and my values and why I treated you the way I did. And I realized something important. She paused, and I waited. I envied you, Vivian said finally. You had something real with Gerard, something authentic. You built a life based on actual love and partnership and shared work. Everything in my life has been about performance and appearances and maintaining the family image. When I met you, I saw someone who had lived genuinely, and instead of admiring that, I resented it. I needed to diminish you because your authentic life made my curated life feel hollow. I was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. That is very insightful, Vivian. I appreciate you sharing it. I am not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I do not think I deserve it. What I did at the wedding was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did and why, and that I am working to become someone different, someone better. I hope you succeed, I said, and meant it. Not for my sake or Callum's, but for yours. Thank you, Vivian said softly. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand, thinking about forgiveness and growth, and whether people can really change. I did not know if Vivian would succeed in becoming better, but I appreciated that she was trying. That counted for something, even if it did not erase the harm she had caused. In December, Callum asked if he could come for Christmas. Just me, he clarified. No complicated family dynamics, no trying to force reconciliation. Just your son, if you will have me. I thought about saying no. Christmas had been difficult since Gerard died, and adding Callum's presence might make it more complicated. But I also remembered all the Christmases when he was young, the excitement in his eyes on Christmas morning, the traditions we had built as a family. Yes, I said, you can come. Christmas Day was quiet and simple. Callum arrived in the morning with groceries for dinner. We cooked together, just like the old days, falling into familiar rhythms in the kitchen. We did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable rather than strained. After dinner, we sat in the living room with the tree lights twinkling and old Christmas music playing softly. Callum looked at the photo of Gerard the one I kept on the mantel, of him smiling in his work clothes, covered in sawdust, happy. I miss him, Callum said. And I miss who I was when he was alive. I think I became someone he would not have been proud of. Perhaps, I agreed, but he also would have believed you could find your way back to better values. Your father always believed in second chances, as long as people did the work. I am trying to do the work, Callum said. I quit the Ashford company. I am working at a smaller firm now, one that does sustainable building projects. The pay is less, but the work feels meaningful. I am also volunteering with Habitat for Humanity on weekends, building houses for people who need them. It reminds me of Dad, of why he got into construction in the first place. I felt something warm bloom in my chest, something that might have been pride. That sounds wonderful. I want to be someone you can be proud of again, Callum said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to earn back your respect, even if it takes the rest of my life. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the man who had bid $8 for me, but the boy who had cried when he accidentally stepped on a bug, who had made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day with more enthusiasm than skill, who had held my hand during Gerard's funeral and promised we would get through it together. Come here, I said. Callum crossed the room and I pulled him into a hug, the first since the wedding. He held on tight, and I held on too, and we cried together for everything we had lost, and everything we might still find if we kept trying. I forgive you, I whispered. Not because what you did is okay, not because the hurt has disappeared, but because you are my son, and you are doing the work, and I believe in second chances too. We spent the rest of Christmas evening looking through old photo albums, telling stories about Gerard, remembering better times. And when Callum left that night, I stood on the porch watching his car disappear down the street, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. Chapter 12. 1 year later. 14 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a framed photograph of Rashid and Layla, taken at what appeared to be a garden party, both of them smiling genuinely at each other rather than at the camera. There was a note attached in Rashid's handwriting. Dear Dorothea, I thought you might appreciate having this. Layla would have liked you very much. You both understood that standing your ground, even when it hurts, even when running would be easier, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Thank you for teaching an old man that lesson. With deep respect, Rashid. I placed the photo on my bookshelf, next to the picture of Gerard. 2 marriages, 2 kinds of love, 2 different lessons about what it means to value yourself and demand that others value you too. My life had settled into a new rhythm. Callum visited regularly now, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to help with projects around the house. We were not as close as we had been before the wedding, and perhaps we never would be again, but we had something different now, something built on mutual respect rather than obligation, on honest communication rather than assumed understanding. He had told me recently that he was seeing someone new, a woman named Sarah who worked as a social worker and had no interest in status or money. She reminds me a little of you, actually, he had said, and I had chosen to take that as a compliment. The support group continued to be an anchor in my life. Marlene and I had formed a deep friendship, the kind that only develops between people who have faced death and decided to live anyway. We traveled together sometimes, small trips to places neither of us had been, making new memories untethered from the past. On the anniversary of the wedding, I woke up thinking about that night, about standing in the ballroom while 200 people laughed at my worth being measured in single digits. I thought about Vivian's cruel toast, about Callum's participation, about the moment when I had felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. But I also thought about Rashid standing up and offering me a way out, not because he knew me, but because he recognized the need to intervene when he saw injustice. I thought about my decision to stay and fight for myself, rather than accept easy money and disappear. I thought about the slow, painful work of rebuilding my relationship with my son, and my sense of my own worth. The phone rang. It was Callum. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I was thinking about what day it is. I wanted to check in on you." "I am okay," I said, and realized it was true. I am thinking about everything that happened, but I am okay. "I will never stop being sorry," Callum said. "Every day, I wake up and remember what I did, and I am sorry. I know," I said gently. "But you also wake up every day and choose to be better. That matters too." We talked for a while about nothing important, just the comfortable conversation of two people who care about each other and are working to maintain their connection. When we hung up, I made myself breakfast, watered my garden, and called Marlene to see if she wanted to go for a walk. Life, I had learned, does not always offer neat resolutions. Sometimes the people who hurt you do not change. Sometimes the apologies come, but the relationships cannot be fully repaired. Sometimes you have to accept that things will never be what they were, and find peace with what they have become instead. My relationship with Callum would always carry the scar of that wedding night. There would always be a part of me that remembered him bidding $8 for me while everyone laughed. But there would also be the memory of him showing up consistently, of him doing the work, of him slowly proving that one terrible choice did not define his entire character. I had learned something important in the months since the wedding, that setting boundaries is not the same as being unforgiving, that demanding respect is not the same as being difficult, that choosing yourself is not the same as being selfish. I had spent 70 years putting other people's needs and feelings before my own, and it had nearly destroyed me. Now, at 71, I was finally learning how to love myself as fiercely as I had always loved others. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. My house was paid off. My medical bills were cleared. My garden was beautiful. I had friends who valued me, a son who was working to earn back my trust, and the knowledge that I had survived both cancer and betrayal and had come out the other side still standing. Was I happy? Not entirely. There was still grief for the relationship I had lost with Callum, still sadness for the years I had wasted trying to earn approval from people who would never give it. There was still anger, sometimes, at how I had been treated, at how long it had taken me to recognize my own worth. But there was also peace. There was pride in what I had survived, and how I had survived it. There was satisfaction in knowing that I had chosen the harder path, the one that required me to stay and fight rather than run away, and that I had emerged from that fight changed, but not broken. At 71, I was finally becoming the woman I should have been all along, someone who knew her own value, who set her own boundaries, who demanded respect rather than begging for it. It had taken a public humiliation, a generous stranger, and a year of painful growth to get here. But I was here now, and that, I decided, was enough. To end. This story teaches us that dignity cannot be bought or sold, that the hardest battles are often with those we love most, and that sometimes choosing yourself is not selfish but necessary for survival. It reminds us that forgiveness is possible but not required, that growth is painful but worthwhile, and that it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Most importantly, it shows that our worth is not determined by how others treat us, but by how we choose to treat ourselves when others fail us.